Welcome to Robinson College here at the University of Cambridge. This term we continue our series of interviews with thinkers and authors from around the world, and today we're very pleased to welcome Liz Ziemska, who joins us from California. Liz Ziemska is a literary agent turned movie agent turned author, and she speaks about her career to date, her work within the genre of magical realism, and her latest project, a novel about the historic Russian figure, Catherine the Great.
Yeah.
Liz Ziemska, very warm welcome to Robinson College here in Cambridge. If I just kick off with the first of the questions then. Can you talk a little bit about your background, about how you ended up as a writer?
Let's see, I was always supposed to be a doctor, and I got to school and I took pre-med, and somewhere in the middle of my journey through pre-med, I realized I was never going to be a doctor. I just didn't want to be a doctor. I didn't want it. Actually, my mother, I think, would have been an artist had she had the choice. She wound up a pediatrician. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wasn't going to be a doctor. But I was interested in science, so I decided to finish my studies. And after I graduated with a BS in biology, I just had no idea what I wanted to do, no idea whatsoever. And the only thing I knew anything about was fashion, because my mother was a crazy fashionista. She would wear like amazing designer clothing under her lab coat, like high heels and the whole thing. She was one of those tinkly ladies. And so I started working in a couple of high-end fashion boutiques. I worked for Ralph Lauren for a couple of years in Los Angeles, and most of the clientele were from Hollywood, in the film business. And the writer's strike happened. I think it was 1988, 89, something like that. And everyone was out of work, but the executives were still immensely wealthy and they had absolutely nothing to do. And the Ralph Lauren store was built like a mansion with rooms and room settings, and they gave out free cappuccinos and free champagne. So people would just arrive at the store and hang out. They would just hang out and greet each other, and oh, there's the head of Columbia, or there's the head of William Morris. They would just hang out, shop, drink, socialize, because it wasn't the style of LA back then. LA back then was very modern and sleek, and this was old Europe. It was a movie set basically, and they went to it, and I became friendly with a number of the executives, and one of them said, you'd make a really great agent. And I said, what is that? And they said, well, come into my office and I'll explain to you what an agent does. He's representatives for writers, directors. And he said, I could get you into the mailroom at William Morris. This was the William Morris agency. I could get you into the William Morris agency mailroom here in LA, where you could do film, or in New York, where you could do books. And the other thing that I'd always been doing during my entire, science career was reading, because my mother considered herself part of the intelligentsia in Russia. She read everything. She read every novel, every book, collected Freud, collected Shakespeare. So I'd always been a huge reader, and I thought, well, I'd rather work with books than screenplays. So I moved to New York and I got into the William Morris agency and I worked there. And then I decided it was too big and too commercial for me. I moved into a little boutique firm in downtown New York near NYU. And I stayed there for 8 years, and I built a list of scientists, science writers, novelists, memoirists, and I did that. And then suddenly the desire to write began to surface, and I started to tinker around with different voices. And anyway, I thought I would want to be something like that, a comedic voice of some sort. But it was time for me to move back to LA, because I wanted more space, a car, sunshine, less snow. So I learned that it was sort of impossible to be a book agent in New York. So I became a film agent once again in LA. The thing that I didn't want to be in the beginning, I became.
Right.
You know, inevitably it came back. The thing you push away from you comes back to you later on in life. So I moved to an agency called UTA in LA, and right when I started working at UTA, I met this woman who was an executive. She was the development executive for a very huge producer I will not name, because he has since been shamed for being incredibly abusive to his employees. You know, Hollywood is going through a period long overdue. So I'm not going to name this guy, but he was and is a brilliant producer, not a good guy. But anyway, so she and I became friends, and she admitted to me that she was taking writing classes at UCLA Extension. So it's immediately that I start working this new job and I meet this person who was like, boom, here's how you can start writing. So I started taking classes at UCLA Extension from some wonderful writers. And I eventually put together a portfolio of short stories. And I thought, well, the next thing that I need to do in order to legitimize myself as a writer, because I'd been an agent for so long, is to get an MFA, a Master's in Fine Arts and Creative Writing. Because I thought, no one will take me seriously. I've been an artist representative. Now I also want to be an artist. I need to prove that I can do it. Which is not to say that everyone needs an MFA, but I felt like I needed one. So I applied to a number of low residency programs, because at that point I was married. I got married. I had a very young stepson. I wasn't going anywhere for a 2-year residential program. I would have to do low res. And I got into the Bennington writing program, which is what you do is you go on campus for 10 days, twice a year, once in January, once in June. And then you get a new teacher each time you go, and then you correspond with them 6 months, sending stories back and forth in mail. That's how low res works. So I did that, and it was a 2-year program. And towards the end of my time there, I realized that I would never be able to complete my thesis and continue working at the agency. I just didn't. There weren't enough hours in the day. And my husband and I at the time spoke, and he said, you know what, quit, start writing. And that's what I did. I resigned from agenting in 2007, and I started writing. And it was a lot harder than I thought it would be. It was way harder. Way harder than I thought it would be.
Do you mean the craft?
Yeah.
Okay.
The craft, yeah. And I'm still only getting a hold of what my proper voice is. It's coming along. It's very close to what you see in Mandelbrot and Hunt Relic, but like I said, I've been working for the past 4.5 years on this massive novel set in the court of Catherine the Great, and it's a huge undertaking. It's a little over 400 pages right now, and if I pull it off, then I think I will have finally found my solidified voice. But it's taken a while.
So hold on, 400 pages.
Yes.
That's a giant. I'm trying to have a sense of how big that is as a book. How many words is that? Like 110,000?
Well, I'll give you Mandelbrot is only 20,000 words.
Yeah.
And my novel is like 105,000 words.
Wow.
So
okay.
Yeah. But I'm pleased with it. It's coming along. I have a very, 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 very big rabbit to pull out of a hat towards the end of it. I know this is a revision. I already know what the plot is, and there's a huge suspension of disbelief that has to happen in the next 15 pages that I'm very, very, very carefully implementing, and we'll see if I pull it off.
Can I ask you then, your draft at the moment, it's 400 pages.
Yeah.
Does that mean you haven't finished in the sense that it's got to get longer, or you haven't finished in the
sense?
sense?
No, it's finished. It's 100 and, like I said, 104,000 words. What I have done is I've invented a new character to put in the very last section, and I've shortened the ending. I've ended the book a little early. There's an ending, there's a coda. I've ended the book a couple of beats earlier than it had ended in the last draft, so that got rid of like 6 pages. But I need some scenes for this new character, and okay. she's gonna give a big speech in about a minute. Which will take me, a long time to get right. But it's really all I have to do is write her speech, and it's done. and then tweak the coda a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, I'm just trying to think of the movie guy who wrote Save the Cat. Was it Ron Snyder, or is one of the?
Save the Cats. Yeah, it's a book. Yes.
Yeah.
It's a book on screenwriting. It's a very famous book. I have it here somewhere, but I haven't read it. But remember, I was a screenwriter's agent for a very long time, and I was married to a screenwriter for 15 years. So I figure like I should know this.
You've seen how the game works. It was just interesting to know that when you're adding pieces, because a book like this and the craze that seems to have followed it seems to say, that every story follows a pattern. There are various beats that you have to hit at certain moments and so on.
Yeah.
And I suppose some people might do that by instinct.
Yeah.
But I was going to ask you, is that too much of a painting by numbers? Do you find that your book grows organically?
I'm definitely I very much appreciate these prescriptive books. I think there's a need for them, and they provide tremendous assistance, and there are patterns in storytelling, Aristotelian, blah blah blah. There's also that book Story by that really famous screenwriting guru whose name escapes me right now. Again, I don't read these books. I do not read, and it's to my detriment, but I write very, very different stories by design. I know what the rules are, but they don't work for my kind of storytelling, because first of all, I'm not working in realism. So there's that. And I'm working heavily with myth. So there's that other element to it. And what I'm trying to adhere to is some sort of internal logic as far as psychology goes. But as far as like formal storytelling, like here's the climax, here's the this, here you need a reversal of fortune here. I don't plot my books out that way. But again, it's harder for me, but I just can't do it. I just can't do it. I find it too formulaic, and it's predictable. Then one thing that I've heard from people who've read my books is like, wow, I did not see that coming at all.
Yeah.
I'm like, thank you.
I was going to ask you about genre. Because this has been a few pieces I've read by you now. The Mushroom Queen's a bit different, I suppose, but Mandelbrot the Magnificent.
Yeah.
So this follows what looks like a historical narrative, and it is a historical narrative, isn't it? Mandelbrot the mathematician, fractalism, and everything. It's all laid out beautifully in a story that works perfectly well, and then something starts to happen that is a bit confusing, and then you realize that the genre is not quite what you thought it was, and yet somehow it's in harmony with everything that's been happening up to that point. And the story itself, although you sort of have said goodbye to realism, on the other hand, I'm not entirely sure what realism is, in the sense that there's something about it that remains utterly real, even though I think you published with Tor, didn't you, which is science fiction and fantasy. But it's not dragons and elves.
No, exactly. You're exactly right. That's the problem. The problem is with publishing. It's not the problem with writing. The problem is always like categories and where you're going to be shelved. But not that we're looking at physical spaces anymore where things get shelved. But actually, bookstores are making a comeback. Tor. What happened with Mandelbrot is that it started out as a short story and became too long. And I gave it to my agent. No, it's 20,000. The average short story, or the limit for most short stories, is about 7,000 words, which is where Hunt Relic falls at around 7,000 words. At 20,000 words, it became too long to publish anywhere other than maybe online. And there were only like 3 places online that published long short stories, and my agent sent it to a couple of them, and Tor snapped it up, and they wanted to do it as a paperback original, so they allowed me to put in the illustrations, which pleased me very much. And so it was never meant to be actually a book. It was only meant to be a story. And as far as what genre it is, I mean, I keep saying that it's magic realism, but it's not really a genre that is talked about much in America. It exists in, South America and Eastern Europe, but in America we have fantasy, sci-fi, and horror. That's what we have.
Okay.
We don't really have magic realism. So, for instance, when I adapted Hunt Relic into a script and I submitted it to the screenwriting contest run by the Academy, I had to check a number of boxes as to what it was. And I said historical, horror, and fantasy. So it's all those things, but there is no magic realism box to check. So that is just a publishing issue, not a writing issue. I don't feel like I write any differently from a number of practitioners of magic realism, but because we need to like stay in the real, and then something happens. That's how I like to do it. I could never do totally immersion sci-fi or fantasy. I could never write Lord of the Rings. I wish I could, but I can't. I could never write full-on sci-fi. That's just not the way my brain works. I like to take reality and see where the incongruities in reality would provide a springboard for something else.
I'm not entirely sure what magical realism is, because I always thought there was a magical component to it, but so you're drawing together, like with the Mushroom Queen, for instance, you're drawing together sort of personal point of view narrative,
right,
from the outset, something that's fantastical, and yet it hasn't really departed. It feels like you're using that mechanism to immerse readers into scientific reality that's underappreciated and that doesn't seem to be accessible by other means. Can you say a bit more about how you would use magical realism as a genre or a tool or whatever it is?
It's interesting because I haven't really thought. I just sort of do. I don't really think, but here's what I've been thinking as you've been speaking is that I think the classical magic realism is it real or is this person crazy? Perhaps that's one way of looking at it, because these things go on inside the protagonist's mind. It's the woman. Is she having some sort of dissociative moment? Or is this really happening to her? With Mandelbrot, is he an overexcitable, nervous teenage boy who wants to do something to save his family, or is this really happening? That these fall more easily into that world. What I'm trying to do in this book that I'm writing now is actually more difficult, because what is happening is perceived by there's a magical being at the center of my story who can do X, Y, and Z, and that being is perceived by normal humans, who some of them are historical figures who are puzzling as to what in fact she is. So what we have is a mythological creature incarnate in a real historical narrative, and I was actually very much freed when I was constructing this character by a piece that appeared in there's a scholarly piece that appeared in Public Domain Review, and it was about the mermaid craze in the 18th century and how people actually thought that mermaids existed somewhere, and even Benjamin Franklin wrote about mermaid sightings in his Philadelphia Gazette. So I thought, okay, this is perfect. Well, that's why it works to put something like that in historical perspective, because what we have are people who are scientifically naive. So what if this is possible? What if this is, they don't know, they're pre-Darwin. They haven't found all the creatures in the Marianas Trench. So perhaps this is possible. So I'm trying to think how magic realism would be defined if I were to situate it in the here and now with completely sort of conventional characters commenting on something unconventional happening in the midst of them.
I always
So
see.
yeah, so I always need something uncanny. I need something uncanny nested in the real. So yeah, that's actually an interesting dilemma to figure for the next project, how I would do that in the present day with all the scientific advancements that we know of. But that I would if I had my phone, I would quickly Google the definition of magic realism. But I think it's a world in which everything is real, and then something bloop happens that isn't, and then the characters are trying to live with that
Okay.
incongruity within the worlds, and then you go about it sort of psychologically, like how would you react to that? How would that change your life? How would that change your perception of yourself, existence, etc.?
It sounds very much like sort of how Hegel tends to be interpreted. You know, the whole this view of history.
Tell me,
Popularized.
please tell me. I don't know about it.
Oh no, it's the thing that's popularized that you probably have heard of: thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
Synthesis, yeah.
But my reading of Hegel is that it's precisely the real business is happening at that moment where thesis meets antithesis, and he has his phrase "tarry with the negative." I think where you're on the borderline between what you know and what you don't.
Yes.
And the challenge is always to embrace what you don't know. And everyone, of course, we live in an age now where everybody thinks they do that. And I don't think many people do. Whatever research you do, whether it's in humanities or in science, presumably it's that moment where your thesis is going to be undermined, enlarged, and so on. Where the interesting, that's where the interesting stuff is really happening. And I wonder, with your scientific background, which you were saying earlier on is at the root of where you are you at root a science communicator who can do narrative in a way that not many can?
I'd like to be. When I was a book agent, I had these two amazing clients. One is Dr. Robert Sapolsky, who's at Stanford, and he's a neurophysiologist. But his concentration is stress and how that affects one physiologically. And for years, he went to Kenya and studied a baboon colony and looked at the dominance hierarchies and sort of how it's fascinating. He's an amazing writer. His most recent book is Behave. The book that I represented was called The Trouble with Testosterone. He's very well known for a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. He's like beloved. His lectures are, you can see them on YouTube. He's amazing. The other guy who I represented was Franz de Waal, and he's at the Yerkes Regional Private Center in Georgia, and he studied chimpanzees in captivity, and he also looks at behavior through society's dominance hierarchies, rising, falling. What happens when the alpha gets old, and then the betas start plotting to take him down. It's fascinating stuff, and they're both amazing writers. So yeah, I look at myself as a sort of a science communicator, also like a history communicator, because I actually hated history in high school. I found it unbelievably boring. I think it's the way it's taught. I think it's taught poorly. Memorizing dates and timeline, who cares?
Oh gosh,
no child wants to do that. No. When you're like, no one's interested in narratives, the way to teach it. But I look at pivot points in history interest me. Someone was quoting, was it Lenin, who said, months go by and nothing happens, and then weeks go by and months happen, or decades happen.
Okay, yeah.
So I look at those times when weeks go by and decades happen in history, and they're out there to look at. And I also look at sort of what got me interested in writing this book I'm writing now is that I went to Russia in 2003. I went to Moscow and St. Petersburg. It was a very unique trip because I had just been at the agency for about 4 years, and I become friendly with one of the agents there, one of the television agents there, and she and her friends who are also TV executives would do this annual trip because TV used to be seasonal before the streamers happened, and TV would go to sleep. Basically, the TV business would go to sleep in July, and people could then travel. So she and her friends would always pick some sort of fabulous destination where part of the destination is sort of learning things and the other part is beach and fun. And so that year they were going to Moscow and St. Petersburg and then to Sardinia. And I said to her, I didn't even know what that was. I said, I'm going with you to Moscow and St. Petersburg. I'm coming with you. So I went, and it was in the early days of Putin, and I just saw things there that no one else did. Also because I was with a bunch of TV executives. They had hired like the most exclusive guides that got us in the back door of the Hermitage. We didn't have to wait in line. We got access to things. We had, super A1 snazzy experience. So I got to see things that most people don't. And I had a lens already on my eyes that was looking for things that my friends were not looking for. And I saw something there that disturbed me. And what I saw was like a deeply wounded pride, like a deeply, deeply wounded pride and a deep resentment against the West. And I saw it there, and I've been thinking about it ever since. And that's what brought about this book. And it's my attempt to sort of answer like what's up with Russia. I know that's I have no right to make these statements, but it's sort of my answering myself. What did I see there? Where did it come? What was that about? And yes, I have mythology at the heart of it, of course, because that's what excites me. So, yeah.
I have to ask one more question about whether you are yourself a fractalist. This is how Mandelbrot describes himself.
Yeah.
Simply about these patterns that when you break them down, they reappear, and you look more closely and they reappear. And no matter how far down you focus, it's the same patterns emerging.
Yeah, no, it's true. I tend to look at things as sort of like cycles and patterns. It's sort of inevitable. I think that's how human organisms process information. And but it makes it great for storytellers, because if you could just take one unit, then you can describe it, or you can attempt to describe it as the part of the whole. So you're right. I think every writer is always looking at little things, little kernel. Like, what's that little thing right there? Is that
at the structural level? But you also are using the way that your humor works seems quite similar to the way that your structure works.
Oh, I can't comment on that. Whatever humor I produce is accidental, but hopefully.
Oh, really?
Hopefully it's there.
That just bubbles out without any effort.
I don't know, just my personality. I don't know. But thank you for telling me I'm funny.
No, it's really
funny.
clear. I mean, I loved the you mentioned cauliflower at the beginning of the Mandelbrot book, and were you talking about this Romanesco cauliflower?
Yes, yeah. I was actually eating lunch. There's a very famous restaurant in Venice here called Jelena, and they make the most delicious Romanesco. And I was having it. I'm like, oh my God, I needed some way to get into the story. And I'm thinking, he was eating Romanesco. Why not? Why not?
Sounds like a great place to finish.
Right. Okay, good. Let's all go make some Romanesco.
There we go. Liz Ziemska, thank you very much indeed.
You're very welcome.
Thank
you
you
for having me.